So one of the challenges that I see guys are mentioning along the way is the use of the expand feature, which is if you go to the layers menu here, you come down and it says expand stroke. So if you have a stroke and you want to expand it, I've got a shortcut key that I created for it called E, but literally what it means is if you come to, let's say, pen tool, I'm going to click there, keep shift to constrain it so I can just make a straight line, and I'm going to give it some thickness. So on caps here on the right, it's rounded. I've got it not set to a miter because miter will influence it differently, but the align of the actual indicators in the middle like that. Okay, so you can see if I do these things, it will alter that. So if you have a stroke like this, when you zoom in and you go and say, let us, and press E to expand, if we look, we pretty much got a decent rounded off area. Okay, and I press Control Z. However, if I go and I take this and I resize, now you notice when I'm sizing it, it's proportionately going, even though I'm changing the length, the sizing is going proportionately, the width also. And that's because on the stroke, if you go into the stroke area, you'll see I've got scale with object. It's always advisable to do that, because if I disable that and I do this, you're going to just have it lengthening itself. So I shouldn't say it's advisable to do it. It depends on the context that you're using. If you are going to take an object and then make the entire object proportionately small, then it's wise to click scale, because then if you make the line smaller, it's proportionate when you're zooming in. If you don't do that, then it will just get shorter and not proportionately size. Like if I go bigger, if I do this small and I switch off scale to object and I make it, it's just going to make it longer. It's not going to proportionately size it. So you use that feature that best works for you. Okay, so if I go into this situation now and I go and make it kind of tiny, if I zoom in, and this is the whole issue with this expand, is the fact that if you look now, I'm on 1,870% zoom factor. If I go closer, I'm almost on 7,000 as a zoom factor. Now, if we take into context most other programs like Illustrator from Adobe, their maximum zoom factor is 64,000%. With Affinity, you can zoom in 1,000 million%. And if you think I'm exaggerating, look at the percentage. I'm going to just keep scrolling and see all that. We are on now already 9 million. And its maximum is 1,000 million%, which is like a billion. So with all of this feature-rich ability to zoom in at any level, there's a cutoff point where, adding smooth roundness is just not going to make sense. Like if we look at this object now, let me just see, if I go and I size this even smaller. Now if I zoom in, this looks big on the screen. If I do this and zoom in, but here I'm on 85,000% here. So if I take this and I zoom right out, in the context of this page, I can't even see that object. So it's not significant to have the same editing features on this piece of design as it would be on a design that's maximized on the big page of yours. So if I zoom in here now, if I press E to expand, look what happens. You're going to see that it's now going to expand it, but this is going to be very distorted. The whole image might not even appear as we're seeing it here. I'm going to press E for expand. Can you see what's happening there? And I'm going to just go to the node tool. The nodes are really, there were 2 nodes, and that's how best it could represent. I'm going to go Control Z again. Okay, so we've got to understand that, yes, you'd like it to, at this level, do nice, smooth rounding, but in all, if I can say in all fairness, there has to be a cutoff point as to how far down the zooming you want to keep the structure. So how do we get to do this if we're not going to, or we understand that there is a limitation with the factor that we are zooming in? how do we manage this going forward? So my suggestion is, and I'm going to speak about the one option, which is to do with scaling. So if I have this object, remember the scale with object and enable and disable that and the effect it has. But if I have this object and I want to turn it into or expand it, the option that I would suggest is you take whichever object you have, you go to the transform palette. If you look down here on my right bottom, that's where mine is docked. If you don't see it, you go to view and to studio, and then you go enable it over there. But if you look at this, I enable the locking of these two proportions to each other. Okay, so I lock them there. I make sure that the scale object is there, because for this purpose, this is what I do. This might feel like a bit of a big workaround, but if I want to achieve that and the quality of the end of the lines, then I'll do this. So here we go. Once I've locked the proportion and I've chosen scale with object, I go into the value that's available for me to type in. I'll click in there. You can remove that area, and then I type in, depending on how big this is, I am going to magnify this by 1000%. So into either the width or the height. I can't type in the height there because it's so sort of relatively small. So I'm going to go into the width. I'm going to type 1000, and I put a percentage sign next to it. Okay, I press enter. It's doing that. I don't have to shift that around. Once I'm happy with that, then now, because I've got a quick key E, I'm going to just press E, and if you notice, I'll zoom in. It's nice and beautiful here. Then I can just go back to one of these areas because it is locked proportionately. And because I zoomed out 1000%, I'm going to maybe just say bring it back to, say, 10%. I put 10% in there at the bottom by the proportion. Say the width or the height, I can put it. Because they locked, it will size down equally. Okay, now you'll see that scale with object is disabled on its own. The reason for that is that it's not a stroke that needs to dynamically keep its proportions. Now this has been converted and expanded. Let me just click on the node tool. You'll see it's all in nodes now. Okay, so I'm going to click back to the move tool. We go back into this width area. The reason I'm retyping this now is just because I clicked out of it, and I'm going to say 10%. So it's going to drop it down to 10% the size. Press enter. There we're back at this level. Okay, so now we've got that very same object, and now we can, because it's been expanded, we can now size it to our heart's content, and the edges will keep and be around. Okay, so hopefully that makes sense to you. When we get the object, if it is a stroke, we take the stroke. If we need to click and convert it to curves, in some cases you might find a thing like this. Oops, this thing is so ginormous. So we might have something like this. And we over there. Let me just go and let me see if this needs to be converted to curves. Can we convert to curves? Okay. This thing we don't need to convert to curves, but if you have to, convert it to curves and then do this process. Okay, so if I do, let me show you where the other problem comes in with people that have had issues with this. If I go and I just do a circle, and I'm going to go to the color swatch and just make the inside transparent, and then thicken the stroke. Okay, so I'm going to do this. This is where it mainly came in. So say you had it on a page like this, and you wanted to create a little tick area. So they'd go in here and go like, okay, I want to now convert this by expanding it. Then they press E, in my case E, or they go to layers and go to expand stroke, and this happens. Okay, it goes all wonky. And if you go to the node tool, you'll see that, you know, there's nodes that's clipping on top there, and they go like, oh, why is this thing so frustrating? So I'm going to go Control Z. So the same principle would apply. What I would do is come in here, and in this case here you can see convert to curves. I would go in either convert to curves. Let's see if we could go directly and we can expand stroke without converting to curves. So it doesn't matter if you convert to curves. I press Control Z, or just leave it like that and press expand, because it will still expand. But here's the same principle I showed you earlier. We've got this. I'm going to make sure that I have the lock proportion on here in the transform window. Then I'm going to come to any one of these values, width or height, and I'm going to even say 2000%. Okay, you see that 2000% at the bottom. I press enter. It makes it this big, and because I have the quick key on E, I'm going to go E for expand. I've expanded. Now it's still selected, so I can just go right back in here, and I'll take it down to maybe, let's say 10%. I just use that as a standard. Put 10% there, press enter, and there we got it. Okay, now it is an expanded stroke. So now when I zoom, you can see I've maintained the beautiful quality in there. Okay, so that is the way that you can do it, and then you pretty much can function with it and then start to, you know, operate with it. Then it's an expanded stroke area. So if you go here now and you go to your color swatch, you'll see there you could change the colors and all the usual there. But now while I'm on this topic, I want to show you one other way that I think is very powerful. It's also used in many other areas of design, but it's called, let me just do it first. I'm going to create this circle area. I'm going to just make the inside transparent, and we can go to stroke and maybe thicken this. So this was the scenario when we pressed E. Okay, it's not that bad on this situation, but let me just make it smaller so we can see. So Shift, Control, and Alt to proportionately size it. Okay, mine is now, as you can see, it's scaling with the object. So I'm going to just zoom in, and yeah, I'm going to just size it maybe like this. If I press E, you can see there's that distortion. Even if I go a bit more, press E. Okay, maybe I can go less. I just want to almost over accentuate the error. Press E. You can see it's like warped on this side here. So Control Z. The option is go big, like I said, then expand, and then percentage-wise come back into your size and work. So this is the other way that we can do it now. Let me show you the tool that is referred to as a compound. So a compound is when you take two shapes or three shapes or four shapes and you put them together and you use the Boolean features, which is these features here on top, this add, subtract, and that, to have the one cut out from the other, or add, or you know, you'll see what I mean now. So how we do that, we don't work with the outside stroke. We convert it to, not convert it, but we make the fill color be the actual thing that we're working with. So I'm going to just pop this across here and make this whole area black. Control Shift Alt just to do this. So if I wanted to do that very same circle, what I would do is, and the compound takes on the color of the object ultimately. The extra components I'm creating doesn't affect the color. They just the almost the Boolean tools to cut with. So I'm going to go Control J. So you see I've got another one, and I'll maybe just color that differently, and then Control Shift and Alt, and then pull it in so you can just see the second one. So here's where the power comes. That very same thing where you wanted to create a sort of expand area, but now you're using these two objects. Now usually what you can do is you can take them and you can click this Boolean here, subtract, and then you're sitting with this perfect area. If that's what you want, then happy days for you. But I'm going to show you a more dynamic way of doing it, almost a parametric way of doing it, where you're able to do this but still keep the editability fully functional. So I'm going to go Control Z. So I have these two ellipses here, or you can just select both of them. You then come up to the layers palette and you can say create a compound. Now I want you to watch what happens in the layers here. I'm going to go to layers, create a compound. You see that it creates a compound, and this is my compound. I'm going to just give it a name. But even if I give it a name, it will always keep that reference in there. Because if you have a curve, it will say curve. If it's pixel layer, it will say pixel. Okay, but if we pop down this area now, you'll see those two ellipses that we had, the inside one and the outside one there. If I'm on this ellipse and I change color, it will do absolutely nothing. On this ellipse, it will do absolutely nothing. So these ellipses are used as Boolean tools, dynamic Boolean tools. If I come onto the compound itself and I change color, it's going to change color because that is the overall parent of these two kind of things. But here's interesting. If you look on this ellipse, you'll see this little icon over here. Now this icon is very similar to these ones on top here, but it's embedded into the area here. So if I click on that, look what happens. If I hover over here, it does an intersect. If I go here, it does a subtract. If I go here, it does a XOR. So when I go to subtract, there we are. So it's dynamically happening. If I switch this off, we are seeing just the bottom one, and if I switch it back on, now I've created exactly the same thing with a cutout of the circle using this ellipse against this ellipse. But it's not a fully sort of flattened structure. It is now fully editable. If I take the compound and I say I'm going to size this, let's see where we are. So I make it now a bit bigger and I bring it here and I go, oh man, this thing is a bit too thin. I want to make it thicker. With this sort of approach, you can go in and go to the inner ellipse and then go size it. I'm going to go Shift, Control, and Alt and just resize it. So there we have a thicker area. Or I could make it bigger, smaller, whatever it is. Or I could take the other outer one and do that bigger, the inner one, do this. Okay, so you can see the power that we have. We are literally working with what we in the 3D world refer to as parametric objects. It's the ability to put things together and create almost, in Blender they call this modifiers. So you don't destroy the actual object, you bring in pieces together and they work cutting each other out and having different effects. But this is where it's powerful, but just to give you a heads up before I end this, of how people can utilize it even at a greater level. So if you come and you want to change this color of the compound, of course you can change it as per normal. So the color would always apply to the compound section. But if you wanted to add another shape in here, let's take this inner shape. If you click on here, the normal way of selection is, if you add objects that are on layers, you'll click Alt, hold Alt and left mouse, and you'll then navigate through the layers. However, with a compound, you've got to click Control to be able to make the selections of the different components. Okay, but look at this cool part of it. If I'm going to click here, I'm going to size this down proportionately, and I'm going to move it to the side. Now I'm moving with this object, but what it's doing, it's Boolean cutting through. And just to show you, if I take this square and I draw this and maybe change the color, let's see, where am I? Oh wait, I'm going to have to take it. I've dropped it by default. It went into that compound. I'm just pulled it out of the compound. So if I take this now and I move it behind here, can you see that's actual hole? That's a hole in the object. So it's Boolean cutting out this. Okay, it's not taking this and putting a white dot on it. It's cutting it out because of this Boolean activity that we've got here. I'll just leave that in the background so you can see the effects. So I'm coming on here, pressing, what do I press? Control and grab this one. I'll go Alt, hold Alt down and just drag a duplicate out and press Shift to constrain it. Can you see what we have now? I'm going to grab this. Okay, maybe I'll move it away and just delete that. You get the principle. I've now created like two little eyes. I could come in and maybe draw a, let's go with this triangle. I'm going to just put a triangle here. And this triangle I can cut any, turn into any color. But if I bring this triangle into the compound, it's going to not keep this color. It's just going to act as a object that's either going to work with one of these Booleans. Okay, so if I pull, you notice here, as I made a duplicate, each of these duplicates have their own ability to Boolean. So in this case here, I could go, this one must be different in its activity. Okay, let me not fiddle with that now, but it can be different in its activity, the one eye to the other one. Look at that. Okay, so I can have that effect. If I take this now, I'm going to drop it. I'm going to drag it. If you click on this, or I don't have to click on it, I can just go to the compound. I'm going to drag it. And you can see as soon as it changes to the color of the compound, it means it's engaging with that compound. And I'm going to drop it there. You see it's now brought it in and it's created its own Boolean. So if I take this and let me just select it here and I move it across here, it's not doing anything because here it's in add mode. If I go click and I move to intersect, it's doing intersect. If I go to subtract, so now I've added a subtract Boolean on that, and now I can shape this accordingly. You see there I can create a nose. If I'm on the compound, I can, and I do something, let me see, I'm going to go with the crescent tool. It's not going to necessarily put it into the area. Okay, so if I press delete, if I go in to the compound onto any one of these layers, if I go in here and then I engage, you'll see that it will embed it inside here. But then I've got to go and say, let's say that's going to be subtract also. And then I can edit this tool independently. Isn't this cool? Let me just size this. So here I've created a compound object. And this particular object now I can modify as I go along the way. So if I have this and I decide, you know what, I think I am going to want to make these eyes a little bit bigger. It's as simple as coming to these ellipses, pressing the Control Shift and maybe constrain. I'm now moving it out of sync here. Let me just select this one. Where are we? I'm going to bring that across and possibly bring this one across. Okay, but these are all dynamic things. They are Booleaning from this particular object. So this is how you could use it. Powerfully, it creates a compound, and there's many other uses. But the compound literally takes two shapes, brings them together, and gives you on each of these, if I can call these layers, you have the ability to have a Boolean effect that's different to the other layers. And if we want to, we can take all of these, select them, and move them out of the compound, and if you move them there they are. Okay, or we could take all of them, take them back in and drop them there and just move them across, and there they will act in that way. So hopefully that has helped you and given you kind of good perspective on how to use the expand tool and how to use this compound tool to manipulate shapes against each other and get the results you're looking for. Hopefully that has helped, and have a fantastic day and God bless.